Ever think about how the thickness of liquid could actually make cells move faster?
Huh, that's interesting. Most people probably couldn't think that. It does go against intuition, but that's what some new research is pointing to.
Yeah, you'd think it would be the opposite, right?
Right. Like thicker fluid would slow things down. We tend to picture cells floating in this watery fluid, but it's way more complicated than that.
So what's the real story then?
Well, the fluid surrounding cells, it's called extracellular fluid, and it can actually be, get this, 5 times thicker than water.
Wow, 5 times. What makes it so thick?
It's all the different molecules in there, proteins, sugars, all sorts of stuff. They end up creating this much more viscous environment.
Okay, so it's thick.
Yeah.
But how does that make cells move faster?
Well, think of it like this. When a cell bumps into this thicker fluid, it kind of senses that increased resistance. And it's like it knows, okay, I need to power through this.
So it's almost like the cell hits the gym, starts building muscle to deal with the challenge.
I like that analogy. You're spot on. The cell's internal structure, it's made of this protein called actin, and it actually becomes denser and more organized in response.
So the cell adapts. That's pretty amazing. It's not just floating around, it's reacting to its surroundings.
Absolutely. And there's more to it. This whole process, this increased movement, it also relies on these things called ion channels. They're within the cell membrane.
And what do these ion channels do?
Well, one of them, it's called NHE1, basically acts like a pump.
A pump for what?
It draws water into the cell, and this influx of water, it increases the internal pressure of the cell.
Ah, so it's like the cell is bulking up and pumping itself up.
Exactly. It's going all out to move through that thicker fluid.
I'm guessing there are even more players involved in this?
You bet. There's another key one. It's a calcium channel called TRPV4.
Okay, another channel. What's its role?
All that extra water inside the cell, it creates tension in the cell membrane. And that tension activates TRPV4.
And what happens when it's activated?
It triggers this whole cascade of events. Long story short, it activates a protein called RHOA.
RHOA. Okay, what's so special about RHOA?
It's the maestro of contractility.
Hmm.
RHOA controls the cell's ability to contract, to squeeze and relax.
So it's involved in how the cell actually moves itself forward.
Exactly. And in thicker fluids, RHOA activity goes up, especially at the front of the cell.
So it's like the cell is focusing its efforts, putting more power into its front end to push through.
Precisely. And combine that focused contractility with the denser actin network we talked about, and you've got a real powerhouse for movement.
Wow. So thicker fluid sets off this whole chain reaction inside the cell, making it stronger, giving it more internal pressure, and ultimately making it better at moving.
Yeah.
It's incredible how it adapts to overcome the challenge.
It really is. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really interesting. Cells, they can actually remember the viscosity they were exposed to, even after the fluid goes back to normal.
Hold on. A memory of thickness.
Yeah. It's called viscous memory, and it can actually have lasting effects on how the cell behaves.
So even being exposed to thicker fluid for a short time could have long-term consequences.
Yeah, that's what researchers are finding, and this is where it starts to get a little bit, well, concerning, especially when we consider cancer cells.
Because cancer cells are all about moving and spreading, right?
Yeah.
So could this memory make them even more aggressive?
That's one of the big questions scientists are looking into. See, around tumors, the extracellular fluid is often thicker.
So that thicker fluid might actually be helping the cancer cells break away and spread to other parts of the body.
That's one possibility. And even if they do escape that environment, that memory of enhanced movement could stick with them, make them more efficient at invading other tissues.
That's a scary thought. How does this viscous memory even work?
Great question. Scientists are still trying to figure out all the details, but they've found that it's connected to something called the Hippo pathway.
The Hippo pathway, what's that?
It's this really complex signaling network inside the cell that controls growth and proliferation.
So it determines whether a cell grows and divides.
You got it. And it seems like being exposed to thicker fluids, it actually suppresses the Hippo pathway.
So not only is the thicker fluid making cells move faster, but it might also be encouraging them to grow uncontrollably. This has huge implications, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a game changer in how we think about cell behavior and disease. Huge implications, definitely. But there's a flip side to this too. It's not all doom and gloom.
Oh, a positive side to thicker fluid.
Think about wound healing.
Okay. So our bodies need to repair themselves.
Exactly. And that healing process, it relies on all these different cell types. They have to migrate to the injury site to do their job.
I see where you're going with this. If thicker fluid speeds up cell movement, maybe we could use that to help wounds heal faster.
You're catching on quick. That's the idea. What if we could manipulate the viscosity of the fluid right there at the wound? We might be able to speed things up, help people recover more quickly.
That would be amazing. So you're talking about potential treatments that could actually change the thickness of fluids in the body.
That's where the research is headed. It's pretty exciting stuff. And wound healing's just one example. We could apply this to the immune system, too.
Our immune system. How so?
Think about how our immune cells work. They're constantly on the move, traveling throughout the body to fight off infections.
So if we could make the fluid they travel through thicker, they could get to where they need to be faster.
Right. And that could make our immune responses more effective, maybe even give our immune system a boost when we need it most.
Wow. Almost like giving our immune system a turbocharge. This is incredible. But how far along are we? Are scientists actually working on treatments based on this?
It's still early days, but the potential's huge. Scientists are exploring all kinds of ways to manipulate viscosity in specific parts of the body, maybe through targeted medications or even new types of materials for wound dressings.
This is mind-blowing stuff. But I have to ask, how do researchers even measure the viscosity of these fluids? It's happening on such a tiny scale.
It's quite clever, actually. They use these things called microfluidic devices.
Microfluidic devices.
Think of them like tiny chips with these little channels that mimic the environments inside our bodies.
So they create these miniature obstacle courses for the cells to navigate.
That's the idea. They can control the thickness of the fluid in those channels and see how the cells respond.
It's amazing how scientists can study things on such a small scale. This whole concept, it really changes how we think about the world inside our bodies. We usually imagine cells just floating along peacefully.
I know, right? But it turns out they're a lot more active than we give them credit for. This research really shows how cells and their environment are constantly interacting.
So the takeaway is that the thickness of this fluid around our cells, it's not just some minor detail. It's actually really important for how cells move, how they grow, and even how they communicate.
It's like we're discovering this whole new world, this hidden world inside us with its own set of rules. And the more we learn about those rules, the closer we get to finding new ways to treat diseases.
This research has the potential to really change medicine, doesn't it? But are there any, downsides to all of this? Challenges that come with manipulating viscosity?
Of course. There are always challenges when we try to take a scientific discovery and turn it into a real treatment, figuring out how to target the right areas of the body. That's one of the biggest hurdles.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, increasing viscosity where we need it, but without messing things up somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because our bodies are complex systems, right?
Right. Everything's connected. Changing things in one area could have unexpected effects elsewhere. That's why researchers have to be super careful. Lots of testing, making sure any new treatment is safe and effective.
That makes sense. It's important to remember that even with exciting new discoveries, there are always potential risks to consider. So what are some of the big mysteries that researchers are still trying to figure out in this field? What are they still scratching their heads about?
Well, we've learned a lot about how cells respond to viscosity. We know some of the key players, like the ion channels and RHOA, but there's still so much we don't know about the nitty-gritty details, like that viscous memory, for example.
Right. How cells can hold on to that memory of thicker fluid, even after it's gone.
Exactly. It's like they've learned something from that experience and they're holding on to that knowledge. Understanding how that memory works at a molecular level, that could be huge for developing treatments, especially when it comes to cancer. Being able to erase or modify those memories, that could be a real game changer.
It's like we're trying to decode a secret language inside our cells. Once we crack that code, who knows what we'll be able to do?
Yeah, it makes you wonder what other secrets our cells are hiding. What else are we missing? It's really humbling when you think about it. We keep making these discoveries that totally change how we understand biology. This whole thing with viscosity, it really highlights just how dynamic cells are. They're not just along for the ride, they're active players in their environment.
So it's not just about the chemical signals they're exposed to, right? It's also about the physical forces that act on them.
You got it. They're sensing and responding to all sorts of things, including viscosity. It's almost like they have a sense of touch, a way of feeling the world around them.
That's a cool way to think about it. So they're using this sense of touch to move around, to talk to each other, even to make decisions about how they grow.
That's what it looks like. And we're really just starting to understand how it all works.
It really changes how we picture cells. It's not just a flat, two-dimensional world in there. It's three-dimensional, and it's full of these mechanical cues that cells are constantly responding to.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Imagine you're walking through a crowded room. You're not just seeing what's around you. You're feeling your way through the crowd, adjusting how you move based on how much space there is, how much pressure you're feeling from other people. Cells are doing something similar, but on a much smaller scale. They're sensing the viscosity, the tension, the pressure, all these mechanical forces, and they're constantly adapting.
So they're navigating a super complex landscape that's always changing. If we could figure out how they sense and respond to these mechanical cues, could we actually manipulate them, to treat diseases?
That's the ultimate goal. It could change everything about how we approach medicine. Imagine fine-tuning the environment around cells, getting them to heal faster, boosting the immune response, even stopping cancer from spreading.
So we're not just talking about chemicals anymore, right? It's about mechanical balance, too. Making sure cells are getting the right physical signals to function properly.
That's a great way to put it. Restoring that cellular harmony, it could really transform healthcare as we know it.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? We have learned that the fluid surrounding our cells, it's not just water. It's a dynamic environment that plays a huge role in how cells behave. We've seen how thicker fluid can actually make cells move faster, and we've talked about what that could mean for diseases like cancer and for things like wound healing and immune responses.
And we've delved into how cells actually sense and respond to viscosity, even remembering past experiences. It's amazing to think about all the complex stuff that's happening inside us all the time.
It really is. So as we wrap things up, what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember from all of this?
I'd say it's this. Never underestimate the power of the small stuff. The thickness of the fluid around our cells, most people never even think about it. But it turns out it can have a huge impact on our health and well-being. And as we learn more about this hidden world, who knows what we'll discover? We might find ways to revolutionize how we treat diseases and live healthier lives.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from looking at the tiniest details. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world inside our cells. Until next time, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.